Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm 34 years old, and I never imagined I'd walk through the front door of my own home and feel like an uninvited stranger. After cutting short a critical business trip in Zurich, I returned to a shocking scene. 88 people, a chaotic crowd of relatives and strangers, were partying in my house. My mother, Beverly, stood in my kitchen, wearing an apron, confidently directing a team of caterers as if she owned the place. My younger brother, Ethan, was playing bartender, pouring drinks at my grandfather Maxwell's Cherished antique bar. A full-blown family reunion was in full swing, a reunion I knew absolutely nothing about, hosted in the historic Victorian home my grandfather had specifically left to me in his will. If you're watching this from your own family gathering, I truly hope yours feels warmer and more inclusive than mine did. Drop a comment below to share your own family reunion stories, and consider subscribing to follow along as I unpack the life-changing decision that reshaped my world. Let me take you back to the beginning of my journey. I built my career through sheer grit and determination. While most of my college friends were out partying, I was up until 3 a.m., hunched over my laptop, coding relentlessly to hone the skills that would eventually land me a coveted position at NextGen Solutions. Starting as a junior software engineer, I worked in a cubicle so tiny I could touch both walls with my outstretched arms. For 7 grueling years, I put in 80-hour weeks, surviving on instant ramen and an unyielding drive to succeed. When colleagues grumbled about demanding clients or impossible deadlines, I kept my head down, focused on finding solutions. That dedication didn't go unnoticed. By age 30, I was leading my own development team. By 32, I'd become the youngest executive director in the company's history, a milestone I'm incredibly proud of. Throughout this journey, my grandfather, Maxwell, was my rock, my biggest cheerleader. He was an old-school engineer who built bridges across the country with his own hands, a man who understood the value of dedication and craftsmanship. When I was just 12, he gifted me my first computer, sparking a lifelong passion. My mother, Beverly, would roll her eyes, insisting she should be outside playing with other kids. But Grandpa Maxwell would lean in, wink at me, and whisper, "Some people build with steel, others with code." Both changed the world. Every Sunday through high school, I'd visit him at the old Victorian house, a family heirloom passed down through 3 generations. While my mother and brother often skipped those visits, I'd sit with Grandpa in his study, absorbing lessons on structural integrity, mathematical principles, and, most importantly, personal integrity. "A Morgan never cuts corners," he'd say, pointing to the intricate woodwork of his antique mahogany desk. The person who crafted this took pride in their work, even in the parts no one would ever see. That's the mark of someone worth trusting. My brother, Ethan, 3 years my junior, chose a very different path. Blessed with natural charisma, he had a knack for convincing people to give him what he wanted without much effort. Where I worked tirelessly for my achievements, Ethan expected them to fall into his lap. He started and dropped out of 4 different college programs, each time persuading our mother that he'd finally found his true calling. Every new venture required startup funds, which Beverly, a teacher stretching her modest salary thin, always provided. When Grandpa Maxwell passed away 2 years ago, his will shocked everyone except me. The family home, a stunning Victorian in a now trendy Boston neighborhood, valued at nearly $2 million, was left solely to me. His note in the will was simple yet profound, to Rachel, who understands the value of building something to last. My mother was furious. "He must have been confused at the end," she insisted, claiming the house was meant for the entire family. She expected me to sign it over or sell it and split the proceeds with her and Ethan. But I couldn't do that. To me, the house wasn't just wood and plaster. It was every Sunday afternoon spent learning from Grandpa, every proud smile he gave when I shared my accomplishments, every quiet moment in his library reading books from his treasured collection. I moved in immediately, pouring my heart into lovingly restoring each room while preserving its historic charm. I transformed the library into my home office, but kept Grandpa's books and his antique desk exactly where they belonged. I replanted his garden, following his meticulous notes, reviving the heirloom roses he'd cultivated for decades. Despite the tension over the inheritance, I tried to maintain a relationship with my mother and brother. I invited them for holiday dinners, though they attended with an air of being reluctant guests rather than family. I offered to help Ethan with his latest business scheme, a food truck concept, by providing business planning support instead of cash, which he curtly declined. I even offered to assist my mother with her mortgage payments, which she accepted but mentioned at every opportunity, as if I were charging interest on a loan rather than offering a gift. It was exhausting, but I kept trying, hoping for a connection that never quite materialized. The Zurich trip was a pivotal moment in my career. NextGen had been vying to secure Helvetica banking systems as a client for years. As the new international accounts director, landing this contract would cement my reputation and open European markets for our company. After 2 exhausting weeks of presentations, negotiations, and sleepless nights, I secured a 3-year contract worth millions, a triumph I'd worked tirelessly to achieve. My team wanted to celebrate in Zurich over the weekend, but I was homesick. I longed for the quiet comfort of my own space, a moment to savor my victory in my garden with a glass of fine wine, reflecting on how far I'd come. So I booked an early flight home, not telling anyone I was returning 2 days ahead of schedule. It was meant to be my private victory lap, a moment to reconnect with the home that grounded me. During the flight, I scrolled through photos of my garden on my phone. The spring tulips would be in full bloom, arranged in a pattern Grandpa had designed years ago that spelled out "Onward" when viewed from the upstairs window, his favorite motto. I thought about the bottle of Cabernet I'd been saving for a special occasion. This moment, this achievement, certainly qualified. As the Uber turned onto my street, I felt that familiar warmth of coming home after a long trip, a sense of peace and belonging. That feeling lasted precisely 12 seconds until I saw the cars. They were everywhere, parked haphazardly on both sides of the street, some on my lawn, others blocking my driveway. The bass of loud music thumped through my usually tranquil neighborhood, shattering the calm. My driver had to stop half a block away. "Looks like some party," he remarked, helping me with my luggage. I stood on the sidewalk, staring at my house, trying to make sense of the surreal scene before me. Lights blazed from every window, shadows of people moved inside, and laughter and conversation spilled out onto my carefully tended garden, where strangers stood in clusters, holding plastic cups, cigarette ash falling carelessly onto my flower beds. What was happening? Had my home been taken over? I took a deep breath, my heart pounding, and wheeled my suitcase up the path to my front door, a growing sense of dread weighing on me with each step. The walk from the street felt like crossing into another reality. My garden, which I'd spent countless weekends perfecting, was a trampled mess. The tulips Grandpa and I had so carefully planned were crushed under careless feet. Cigarette butts littered the lawn like toxic confetti. Someone had rearranged my hand-carved teak garden chairs to create a makeshift smoking area, with rings from sweating beer bottles staining the wood. A group of middle-aged men I didn't recognize stood near my koi pond, one tossing coins into it for luck. I wanted to scream that copper is toxic to fish, but I was too stunned to speak. Children chased each other through the yard, one dangerously close to toppling the stone lantern my grandfather had imported from Japan in the 1970s. No one stopped me or questioned my presence as I approached my own home. Why would they? I was just another face in a sea of strangers. The front door was propped open with a potted plant that had been moved from my sunroom. Stepping inside, I was hit by a sensory overload. The smell assaulted me first, a mix of clashing perfumes, cooking odors, and spilled alcohol. The noise was deafening, dozens of conversations overlapping, music blaring from my living room sound system, children shrieking as they raced up and down my stairs. The air was stifling, packed with far more people than my home was meant to hold. My foyer, normally a serene space with a simple antique console table and a mirror, was cluttered with purses, jackets, and gift bags. A banner hung across the archway to the living room, proclaiming Morgan Family Reunion 2025, bringing the generations together. A folding table held name tags and a guest book, as if this were a public venue. I moved through my home in a daze, recognizing distant relatives I hadn't seen in years mingled with faces I didn't know at all. My great-aunt Mabel, who I thought lived in Arizona, was sitting in my reading nook with several elderly women. Cousins I vaguely remembered from childhood summers were clustered around my dining table, now extended with rental tables to accommodate a sprawling buffet. Then I spotted my mother in the kitchen, wearing an apron, directing two women who appeared to be catering staff, pointing to my pantry to fetch more serving platters. At 62, Beverly looked younger than her years, her hair freshly highlighted, wearing a dress I'd never seen, adorned with a corsage. When she turned and saw me, there was no joy, no surprise, no warmth, just annoyance. Her smile faltered. "Rachel, what are you doing here? I thought you were in Europe until Sunday." Not "welcome home," not "we missed you," just irritation at my unexpected arrival. "I live here, Mom," I said, my voice tight as I struggled to process the chaos. "What is all this?" "It's the family reunion," she replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "We've been planning it for months." "Planning what?" "In my house?" "Without telling me?" I asked, incredulous. She waved a hand dismissively. "We knew you were busy with work. Besides, you're always saying we should use the house more, that it's too big for just you." That wasn't true. I'd never said anything of the sort. In fact, I'd been crystal clear about my boundaries, especially after Ethan once showed up with friends for an unannounced pool party while I was at work. Before I could respond, my brother appeared, carrying a tray of empty glasses. At 31, Ethan still had the boyish charm that had always gotten him out of trouble. He wore a blue button-down with Morgan Family Reunion Host embroidered on the pocket. "Oh, you're back early," he said casually. "Surprise." The word lacked any genuine enthusiasm, thrown out as an afterthought. "How did you even get in?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "Mom had the spare key you gave her for emergencies," Ethan replied with a shrug. "Don't worry, everything's under control. We hired cleaners for tomorrow." I looked around at my home, transformed without my knowledge or consent into a venue for people who were largely strangers to me. I noticed scratches on my hardwood floors from moved furniture. Someone had rearranged my living room to fit more seating, pushing my grandmother's antique secretary desk against the wall, where it now bore rings from wine glasses left carelessly on its 17th century wood. A tall, older man approached me, curiosity in his eyes. "You look familiar. Are you from Mabel's side or Richard's side?" "I'm Rachel Morgan." "This is my house," I said flatly. His eyes widened. "Oh, you're Maxwell's granddaughter. The one who got the house." The way he said "got the house" made it sound like I'd won a raffle, not inherited my grandfather's legacy. "Yes, I own this house," I clarified. "Well, it's nice of you to host everyone. Beautiful place. Should have been divided among the family, though, if you ask me." A lot of people were surprised by Maxwell's decision. He wandered off before I could respond, leaving me seething. As I moved through the crowd, I overheard similar sentiments. Never see her at family functions anyway. Spends all her time working. Doesn't even know half the family. What would she do with all this space? Family photos, taken from my storage boxes in the attic, were displayed for all to see. Cousins were rifling through my grandfather's record collection. Someone had moved my laptop from my office to make room for a dessert table. My private space had been utterly violated. In the dining room, I found a stack of custom t-shirts emblazoned with Morgan Family Reunion 2025 and a date from 3 weeks ago. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment gathering. It had been meticulously planned without my knowledge. My head was spinning. I needed air. I stepped onto the back porch, only to find it occupied by teenagers I didn't recognize, scrolling on their phones, complaining about being dragged to a lame family thing. I walked back through the house, past my mother posing for photos with people introduced as second cousins from Chicago, past Ethan mixing drinks and basking in attention from female relatives, past great-uncle someone and first cousin once removed whoever. No one noticed as I picked up my suitcase, still sitting in the foyer where I'd left it. No one called after me as I walked out the front door. I made it halfway down the block before tears blurred my vision. I pulled out my phone and booked a room at the Marriott downtown. I couldn't stay and make a scene. I couldn't pretend this was okay. I needed space to think, to breathe. As the Uber pulled away, I looked back at my grandfather's house, my house, glowing with light and life, filled with people who didn't know me, didn't respect me, and apparently didn't miss me when I wasn't included. The betrayal cut deep, but the disrespect to my grandfather's wishes and my personal sanctuary hurt most of all. In the sterile quiet of the hotel room, I dropped my suitcase by the generic desk and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence was a stark contrast to the chaos I'd just left. I stared at my phone, wondering who to call, what to do next, how I'd ever look at my home the same way again. For nearly an hour, my mind replayed the evening like a bad movie I couldn't turn off. This wasn't the first time my mother and brother had dismissed my feelings, but it was by far the most egregious violation. Memories flooded back, revealing a pattern I'd normalized but now saw with painful clarity. My 8th birthday party, where my mother invited the entire class but forgot to order a cake I wasn't allergic to, saying, "Oh, Rachel, don't make a fuss." The other children are enjoying themselves. My high school graduation, where they arrived late and left early for Ethan's baseball game, dismissing it with, "It's the semifinals, Rachel. You just walk across the stage. We'll see the photos, the time." I won a prestigious engineering scholarship, and my mother asked if I'd considered something more feminine instead. Meanwhile, Ethan's mediocre grades were celebrated, his abandoned hobbies funded, his irresponsibility framed as finding himself. I called my best friend, Hannah, at midnight, not caring about the hour. Hannah had known my family dynamics for over 20 years and never minced words. "They did what?" she exclaimed after I explained. "In your house? Without even telling you?" "Oh, hell no, Rachel. That's beyond disrespectful." "Am I overreacting?" I asked, doubt creeping in, a reflex from years of being conditioned to question my feelings. "Overreacting? If anything, you're underreacting," Hannah said firmly. "They invaded your personal space, used your property without permission, and didn't even invite you to a family event in your own home. That's not normal, Rachel. That's not okay." Her validation solidified what I already knew deep down. This wasn't just about a party. It was about a fundamental lack of respect that had defined my relationship with my mother and brother for decades. I'd set boundaries they ignored. I'd offered olive branches they took for granted. I'd made excuses for behavior they never had to justify. I barely slept that night, my mind racing through options. Confront them, and they'd minimize it, request an apology, and they'd offer a hollow one to appease me until the next violation, try to explain my feelings, and they'd call me oversensitive. Morning brought resolve. I returned to my house at 9 a.m., expecting most guests to be gone. I was right about the guests, but wrong about the state of my home. The scene was worse than I'd imagined. Empty bottles and glasses littered every surface. Food was ground into my Persian rugs. Someone had been sick in my powder room sink. Rental chairs were stacked haphazardly in my living room. My garden looked like a tornado had torn through it. My mother was in the kitchen, drinking coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I entered. "There you are. Where did you disappear to last night?" "So dramatic, Rachel." No apology, no acknowledgement of the violation, just criticism of my reaction. I stayed at a hotel. Since my bedroom was apparently being used as a coat check room, I replied, struggling to keep my voice even. "Oh, that was Ethan's idea. We needed the space." "You know how these things go," she said casually. "The cleaning crew will be here at noon." "That's not the point, Mom. You used my house without asking me. You didn't even tell me about a family reunion, let alone invite me to it." She sighed, as if I were being unreasonable. "You're always working anyway. Would you even have come? Besides, you're so particular about everything. If we'd asked, you would have had a million conditions." "Yes, I would have had conditions about the use of my personal property." "That's normal," I countered. Ethan emerged from the guest room, hair disheveled, wearing yesterday's clothes. "Morning," he mumbled, heading for the coffee. "Great party, right? Everyone loved the house. Why didn't you tell me about this reunion?" I asked directly. He shrugged. "We needed a big place, and you have all the space." Seemed obvious. What's the big deal? We're family. The big deal is that this is my home, not a public venue. You can't just decide to use it without my permission. Technically, it's the family home, my mother interjected. Your grandfather would have wanted everyone to enjoy it. That was the match that lit the fuse. Don't you dare tell me what my grandfather would have wanted. He specifically left this house to me because he knew I would respect and care for it. I walked away, needing to assess the damage. What I found sent me from angry to livid. In the study, my grandfather's antique mahogany desk, the one he'd used to teach me about craftsmanship and integrity, had a deep scratch across its surface and a burn mark from a cigarette, despite my strict no-smoking policy indoors. That desk wasn't just furniture. It was where he'd taught me to draft, where he'd written letters of recommendation for my college applications, where he'd penned his final will. In my home office, I found the door ajar, a room I always kept locked. Someone had picked or forced the lock. Drawers were open, work documents displaced, my laptop relocated. The framed first dollar I'd earned freelancing in college was off the wall, its frame cracked. Upstairs, my bedroom door was open, despite a clear, private, "Please keep closed" sign. My closet was ajar, dresser drawers not fully closed. Someone had been in my personal space, touched my things. I returned downstairs to find my mother and brother casually discussing Cousin Phil, who'd apparently been the hit of the party with his karaoke performance. My office was broken into, I said flatly. My bedroom was entered. Grandfather's desk is damaged. Oh, some kids were playing hide-and-seek, Ethan said dismissively. And that desk thing is probably just a water ring. It'll buff out. It's a cigarette burn and a knife scratch, I corrected. It's a 200-year-old desk. Always so dramatic about things, my mother sighed. It's just stuff, Rachel. Just stuff. Those words echoed in my head. To them, this house and everything in it was just stuff they felt entitled to use, damage, and disregard because we shared DNA. But to me, it was more than stuff. It was my sanctuary, my history, my private space, violated by the very people who should have respected it most. I pulled out my phone and called Hannah. Can you come over? I need moral support. While waiting for Hannah, I walked through each room, taking photos of the damage. When she arrived, she gasped. "This is worse than I imagined," she said, hugging me tightly. "What are you going to do?" I looked around at the home I'd loved, now tainted by disrespect. I don't know yet, but I know I can't keep pretending this is normal. After Hannah left, I made another call to Scott Reynolds, a real estate agent who'd approached me several times about selling the property. The Victorian was in a prime location and developers had been eyeing it since my grandfather's passing. "Scott, it's Rachel Morgan. Remember that offer you mentioned last month? Is it still on the table?" My mother and brother, who were in the kitchen discussing which relatives needed airport rides, fell silent when they overheard my conversation. For the first time since I'd arrived home, I had their full attention. Scott arrived within the hour, his slick real estate agent demeanor softening when he saw the state of the property. "This is not how I remember the house looking," he said tactfully, eyeing a stain on the entryway wallpaper. "Family gathering," I replied tersely. "Let's talk in the garden." We sat at the wrought iron table on my patio, the only area relatively unscathed. Scott got straight to business, which I appreciated. The cash buyer I mentioned is still interested. Victor Jang, a tech entrepreneur who relocated from California. He's been looking for a historic property in this neighborhood specifically. What's his timeline? I asked. He's motivated, currently in a short-term rental, and wants to settle quickly. He can close as fast as your side can handle the paperwork. And he understands it's as is. You won't be making repairs or improvements. Scott nodded. At this price point and in this market, he's buying for the location and historical value. He plans to renovate anyway. What's his offer? I asked. $2.1 million cash. Slightly below market value for the expedited timeline, but no inspection contingencies, no financing delays. I nodded slowly, a strange calm settling over me. I want to move forward. Scott tried to contain his surprise. Are you sure? This is a significant decision. The house has been in your family for generations. I'm aware of its history. That's precisely why I'm making this decision. I glanced toward the kitchen window. where my mother and brother were in animated conversation, likely speculating about my meeting. How quickly can we draw up the paperwork? I can have preliminary documents ready this afternoon, the full contract by end of day if the buyer agrees to expedite. We could potentially close within days rather than weeks. Perfect. And I'll need a good real estate attorney to ensure everything is handled properly. Scott made a call, and by 2 p.m., my lawyer, Diane Matthews, arrived. I'd worked with her before on my will and power of attorney documents. She was thorough and discreet, exactly what I needed. While Scott prepared paperwork in my damaged study, Diane and I spoke privately in the garden. Are you certain about this, Rachel? A hasty sale often benefits the buyer more than the seller. I understand, Diane, but my circumstances have changed. I need to move quickly. The price is fair enough for a cash deal and quick closing. She studied my face. This isn't like you. You're usually methodical about financial decisions. Sometimes clarity comes suddenly, I replied. I've realized this house has become more burden than blessing. By late afternoon, I'd signed preliminary documents and authorized Scott to present the offer to Victor Jang. My mother and brother had been suspiciously quiet, observing from a distance but not interfering. That changed when Scott left. What was that about? My mother demanded, entering the garden where I sat reviewing paperwork with Diane. Business, I replied simply. What kind of business requires a real estate agent at our family home? Her emphasis on our didn't escape me. I introduced Diane as my attorney, which put her on alert. I'm selling the house, I said calmly. The buyer is prepared to close quickly. I'll need you both to remove your belongings by tomorrow evening. The silence was deafening. Then came the explosion. You can't be serious, my mother spluttered. This is impulsive and ridiculous, even for you. Ethan stepped forward. Come on, Rachel, you're overreacting about the party. We said we're sorry. Neither of you has actually apologized, I pointed out. But this isn't about apologies anymore. This is about recognizing that some boundaries, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. So you're punishing us by selling our family home. My mother's voice rose with indignation. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm making a decision about my property that makes sense for my life moving forward. We won't let you do this, Ethan threatened. Grandpa would never have wanted you to sell. Grandpa trusted me to make my own decisions. That's why he left the house to me, not the family collectively. My mother switched tactics, her voice softening. Rachel, honey, you're upset. I understand. What we did was thoughtless, but selling your grandfather's house is a decision you'll regret forever. Let's all take some time to cool down. It was the same pattern I'd seen my entire life: minimize, deflect, then pretend to compromise when those failed. Not this time, I said firmly. The decision is made. I've signed the preliminary documents. Mr. Jang has verbally accepted the offer and is sending the signed contract tonight. Diane interjected, Mrs. Morgan, the transaction is already in process. Your daughter has the legal right to sell her property. I suggest you respect her decision and focus on your arrangements for relocation. My mother turned to me, tears welling. Where are we supposed to go on such short notice? The manipulation was transparent, but I didn't take the bait. The same place you were living before you decided to move in here without asking, your apartment, the one I've been helping you pay for. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low and threatening. I could contest Grandpa's will, say he was manipulated or not of sound mind. Diane answered before I could. The deadline for contesting the will passed 18 months ago, Mr. Morgan. I personally conducted the capacity assessment before your grandfather signed his will. It would be a frivolous claim. I spent the evening methodically packing the items that truly mattered: my grandfather's collection of first edition engineering books, family photos from happier times, a small wooden box of letters he'd written me during college, his pocket watch, and the fountain pen he'd used to sign his will. The desk, too damaged to transport safely without professional help, would have to stay. It was too painful to look at daily. Perhaps Victor Jang would restore it, or perhaps it would be replaced by something modern. Either way, I was learning that memories lived on, even when objects changed hands. My mother made several more attempts to change my mind, alternating between guilt, anger, and promises to do better. Ethan fluctuated between threats and bargaining. I remained resolute, feeling a strange peace amid the chaos. By midnight, my essential belongings were packed into my car. I'd booked an extended stay hotel until I could find a new place. As I prepared to leave, I took one last walk through the house, not as a goodbye, but as a release. Each room held memories, but the most important ones would travel with me. My mother stood in the foyer as I headed for the door, her final attempt ready. "If you do this, Rachel, you're tearing apart this family." I turned to her with a sad smile. "Mom, you can't tear apart something that was never truly together." I slept more soundly in the hotel that night than I had in months. The next morning dawned bright and clear. I arrived at the house by 8 a.m. to find Victor Jang and his assistant waiting outside. Scott made the introductions. Victor, younger than I expected, perhaps early 40s, exuded quiet confidence and thoughtfulness. He'd made his fortune in sustainable technology and was refreshingly straightforward. "I appreciate the expedited process, Ms. Morgan. I understand this is a significant property with family history." "Please call me Rachel," I said. "And yes, it has history, but it's ready for a new chapter." We walked through the house together. I made no attempt to hide the damage from the reunion, and to his credit, Victor didn't flinch or renegotiate. "The bones are magnificent," he commented, examining the original crown molding in the living room. "You can't build this kind of character anymore." In my grandfather's study, he paused at the damaged desk. "This is a shame." "American Empire period, yes?" "Circa 1830. "Yes," I confirmed. "My grandfather cherished it." "I know a restoration expert who specializes in period furniture. If you're not taking it, I'd like to have it properly repaired." That small gesture of respect for the house's history meant more than he could know. The closing took place in the dining room, with Diane overseeing the documents. The process was surprisingly simple for such a significant transaction. Signatures, initials, more signatures. Scott beamed, likely calculating his commission. As we reviewed the final documents, the front door burst open. Ethan stormed in, followed by my mother. "Stop. This is a mistake," Ethan shouted, his face flushed with anger or perhaps alcohol. Victor and his assistant exchanged alarmed glances. Diane stepped forward, ever professional. "Mr. Morgan, this is a private real estate closing. If you're not a party to the transaction, I must ask you to leave." My mother pushed past Diane, addressing Victor directly. "This house has been in our family for generations. My daughter is making an emotional decision she'll regret. Surely, as a businessman, you understand the importance of careful consideration." Victor looked uncomfortable but stood his ground. "Mrs. Morgan, I respect family bonds deeply, but I've entered into a legal contract with Rachel, who I understand is the sole owner of this property." Ethan moved closer, desperation in his eyes. "Rachel, please. We can work this out. We'll respect your space. No more surprise parties. You can have whatever roles you want." For a moment, I felt a flicker of doubt. These were the promises I'd wanted yesterday, last week, last year. But I knew they were empty, offered only when something was being taken away, not out of genuine respect. "It's too late, Ethan. The decision is made." My mother played her final card. "If you do this, you're destroying your grandfather's legacy. Is that what you want?" I set down my pen and faced her fully. "Grandpa's legacy isn't this house, Mom. It's the values he lived by and taught me: integrity, respect, self-reliance. He left me this house because he trusted my judgment. I'm using that judgment now." "By throwing away your family," she countered, tears streaming down her face. "No, by recognizing that family is supposed to support and respect each other, not exploit and dismiss each other. You've had countless opportunities to treat me as a valued family member. Instead, you've treated me as an inconvenience at best, a resource to use at worst." Ethan's tone turned threatening. "If you do this, don't expect us to be there when you realize what a mistake you've made." I looked at my brother, the boy I'd helped with homework, the teenager whose bail I'd paid, the adult whose business ventures I'd funded. I felt profound sadness, but also relief. "That's a risk I'm willing to take." Diane interrupted the drama. "If we could continue with the closing, Mr. Jang has a tight schedule." My mother made one last emotional appeal, promising things would be different, that she understood now, that we could start fresh. But her words rang hollow against decades of broken promises. I signed the final documents. Victor handed over a cashier's check for the down payment, with the remainder to be wired upon recording the deed. We shook hands, and just like that, the house that had been in my family for 3 generations belonged to someone else. The moment was anticlimactic, no thunderclap, no dramatic music, just the rustle of papers and the quiet click of briefcases closing. Victor approached me after the formalities. "I want you to know I'll honor the history of this home. It won't be torn down or fundamentally changed." "Thank you. That means a lot." I handed him a set of keys, the same ones my grandfather had given me 2 years earlier. "There's a hidden compartment in the library, behind the 3rd bookshelf from the left." My grandfather kept historical documents about the house there. "You might find them interesting." He accepted the keys with a nod. "You're welcome to visit if you ever want to." "That's kind, but I don't think I will. Some chapters need to stay closed." My mother and brother watched in stunned silence as I gathered my belongings. There were no goodbye hugs, no wishes for good luck, just the heavy weight of choices made and consequences accepted. As I walked down the front path for the last time, I felt lighter with each step. The garden that had once brought me joy now reminded me only of disrespect. The walls that had witnessed my grandfather's lessons now echoed with the sounds of a party I hadn't been invited to. I placed the last box in my car, looked back one final time, and saw my mother in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Ethan was nowhere to be seen. I raised my hand in a small wave, then drove away, a $2.1 million check in my purse and an uncertain but unencumbered future ahead. The first week after the sale was a blur of practical matters. I moved from the extended stay hotel to a furnished apartment with a 6-month lease, giving myself time to decide where to settle permanently. I opened a new investment account for most of the proceeds, set aside funds for taxes, and tried to adjust to my new reality. The silence from my family was both expected and jarring. No calls, no texts, not even angry voicemails. It was as if I'd ceased to exist the moment I signed the closing documents. Part of me was relieved to avoid the drama, but another part ached for the family. I wished I'd had one that would have acknowledged the pain they caused and sought genuine reconciliation. That silence broke on day 9 when my social media flooded with messages from extended family, cousins I barely knew, great-aunts I hadn't seen in years, all expressing shock and disappointment in my selfish decision to rob the family of its heritage. The stories they'd been told were predictably one-sided. I'd had a tantrum over a harmless gathering and impulsively sold our communal heritage out of spite. No mention of the uninvited use of my home, the damage to irreplaceable items, or the years of disrespect that led to my breaking point. I didn't respond to most, but I answered my cousin Melissa, who'd always been kind. Her message was measured, asking if I was okay. "I'm doing fine," I wrote back. "There's more to the story than you've probably heard, but I'm at peace with my decision. I hope you and your family are well." Her response surprised me. I figured there was more to it. "Your mom and Ethan have always had a different version of reality." For what it's worth, I think Grandpa Maxwell would understand. He never let anyone walk over him either. That small validation from someone who knew my grandfather meant more than she could realize. At work, I threw myself into the Helvetica project's implementation. My team noticed my renewed focus and energy. Hannah, during our weekly lunch, observed, "You seem lighter somehow, despite everything." "I feel lighter," I admitted. I didn't realize how much emotional weight that house carried, not just the good memories of Grandpa, but the constant struggle with Mom and Ethan. Now, when I come home, it's just my space. No history, no expectations, no disappointment. "Have you heard from them at all?" Hannah asked. "Not directly. I've heard through the family rumor mill that they had to move back to Mom's apartment. Apparently, they'd started moving things into the house, assuming they could stay indefinitely." Hannah shook her head. The audacity. What did they think would happen? They thought I'd keep tolerating whatever they dished out, like I always have. 2 weeks after the sale, I received an email from Victor Jang with photos of the restoration work on my grandfather's desk. The craftsman believes he can repair the damage completely, he wrote. When it's finished, would you like to have it? It seems to hold special meaning for you. His kindness brought tears to my eyes. I declined. The desk belonged with the house, but his recognition of its significance was healing in a way I hadn't anticipated. That evening, as I cooked dinner in my new apartment, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw my mother, disheveled in a way I'd never seen, hair unstyled, clothes wrinkled, eyes red from crying. My first instinct was to not answer, to protect the peace I'd been cultivating. But something, perhaps my grandfather's voice reminding me of integrity, made me open the door. "Mom," I said simply, neither inviting her nor sending her away. "Rachel," her voice cracked. "Can I please come in? Just to talk." I hesitated, then stepped aside. She entered cautiously, as if expecting to be ejected. My apartment was modest compared to the Victorian, a simple 2-bedroom with standard fixtures, nothing special, but mine. Completely mine. "It's nice," she offered, looking around. "Cozy. What do you want, Mom?" I asked, too tired for small talk. She sank onto my couch, looking every one of her 62 years. "We've been evicted from my apartment. The landlord found out Ethan was living there when the lease prohibited additional occupants." Of course. She hadn't come to reconcile, but to seek help, financial help, most likely. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Where are you staying now?" "A motel, temporarily." "It's not ideal. Ethan is looking for work, but you know how that goes." I didn't know. Ethan's employment history was a series of enthusiastic starts and abrupt departures. "What about your savings?" I asked, suspecting the answer. "Used for the reunion," she admitted, not meeting my eyes. "And some for Ethan's latest business idea, a specialty coffee shop." The location fell through. The admission hung between us. She'd spent her savings on a party I wasn't invited to and another of Ethan's doomed ventures. "How much do you need?" I asked, cutting to the chase. She looked up, hope flashing across her face. "Just enough for a security deposit and first month's rent on a new place, $3,000, maybe 4. I'll pay you back, of course." The familiar pattern, her crisis, my resources, promises of repayment that would never materialize. For a moment, I considered it. It would be easier. I had the money. But then I thought of what my grandfather would say about enabling versus helping. "I can't give you money, Mom." Her face fell. "Rachel, we're about to be homeless. After everything I've done for you." "I'm not saying I won't help," I interrupted. "I'm saying I won't give you money. There's a difference." She looked confused. "What difference?" "I won't enable the same patterns that got us here. But I will help you find resources, affordable housing options, employment counseling for Ethan, maybe financial planning services. We don't need counseling or services. We need a place to live." "You need both," I said firmly. "And if you're willing to accept the help I'm offering, help that might actually change things, then I'm here for you. But I won't just write a check that postpones the next crisis." She stood, anger replacing desperation. "So this is your revenge? Making us jump through hoops when you're sitting on millions. This isn't revenge, Mom. It's boundaries, something I should have established long ago." "Boundaries?" she scoffed. "Is that what your therapist calls abandoning your family when they need you?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, I am seeing a therapist because healthy people seek help when they need it. That's what I'm offering you, real help, not a temporary band-aid." She grabbed her purse, heading for the door. "Keep your help and your judgments. We'll manage without you, like we always have." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. She'd come because they couldn't manage. As she reached for the doorknob, I said quietly, "The offer stands, Mom. When you're ready for real change, call me." She paused, shoulders rigid. For a moment, I thought she might turn around, might see the opportunity. Instead, she opened the door and left without another word. The encounter was painful but clarifying. For the first time, I'd offered help with conditions designed to create change, not perpetuate dependency. It wasn't what she wanted, but perhaps it was what she needed. My phone buzzed with a text from Hannah checking in. "You okay?" I thought carefully before responding, getting there, one day at a time. And surprisingly, it was true. 6 months passed quickly. Spring turned to summer, summer to fall. My temporary apartment gave way to a cozy townhouse in a quieter neighborhood with a small but private garden where I planted tulips in memory of my grandfather. My career flourished. The Helvetica project led to a promotion and expanded international responsibilities. But the most significant changes were internal. Weekly therapy sessions helped me recognize patterns I'd normalized and develop healthier responses to conflict. I learned that boundaries weren't selfish but necessary, that helping others didn't mean sacrificing myself. After our confrontation, my mother and I didn't speak for nearly 3 months. I heard through Melissa that she and Ethan had found a small 2-bedroom apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. Ethan had taken a job at a hardware store, not his dream position, but steady employment for the first time in years. When my mother finally called, her tone was different, less entitled, more hesitant. "Rachel, it's me. I was wondering if we could meet somewhere, just to talk." We met at a neutral coffee shop midway between our homes. I arrived early, choosing a table by the window. She looked older, more subdued, but there was a dignity in her bearing I hadn't seen before. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, hands wrapped around her cup for warmth. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about everything. The house, the reunion, the way I've treated you." I stayed cautious, but open. "What brought this on?" "Reality," she said with a sad smile. "When you have nothing, you start to see things clearly. And I had a good teacher in that department." "What do you mean?" "Your grandfather. After you sold the house, I was so angry, I went to visit his grave, to complain about you." She shook her head at the memory. "While I was there, I remembered something he always said when I was young. Beverly, life doesn't owe you anything. It's what you build with your own 2 hands that matters." I realized I stopped building long ago. I just expected things from your father, my parents, you. That's not the example I should have set for my children. Her admission stunned me. Never had I heard her acknowledge wrongdoing, let alone a lifelong pattern. "I wasn't fair to you, Rachel," she continued. "Not just with the party, but for years. I favored Ethan, took you for granted, resented your success instead of celebrating it." The conversation wasn't easy. Old patterns threatened to resurface, but there was an honesty that had been missing for decades. "I can't change the past," she said as we prepared to leave, "but I'd like to try for a better future if you're willing." I didn't make promises I couldn't keep. "I'm open to trying, Mom. One step at a time." Rebuilding trust is a slow process. We started with monthly dinners, just the 2 of us at first, eventually including Ethan when he showed willingness to change. Our first holiday meal together was at a restaurant, neutral territory that didn't carry past conflicts. My relationship with Ethan evolved more slowly. His resentment ran deeper, his entitlement more ingrained, but necessity forced changes. The hardware store job sparked an interest in home repair. By the following spring, he'd earned his contractor's license and started a small handyman business. "I like fixing things," he told me in a rare moment of vulnerability. "There's something satisfying about taking something broken and making it work again." I didn't point out the metaphor. He'd find it in his own time. Not all family relationships could be salvaged. Some relatives clung to their narrative of me as the selfish villain who destroyed the family legacy. I made peace with their perception, understanding I couldn't control how others viewed my choices. Instead, I focused on building my chosen family, friends who respected my boundaries, colleagues who valued my contributions, neighbors who became confidants. Hannah remained my steadfast supporter, and I expanded my circle to include people who brought positivity into my life. A year after the sale, I received an email from Victor Jang with photos of the restored house. He'd preserved its historical character while modernizing the infrastructure. My grandfather's desk held a place of honor in the study, fully restored. The garden was replanted according to historical designs, including a tulip pattern spelling "onward" from above. "Your grandfather's legacy lives on," he wrote, "different but honored." His words captured what I'd been trying to articulate. My connection to my grandfather wasn't in wood and plaster, but in the values he'd instilled: integrity, self-respect, the courage to build something lasting. The house was a symbol, important, but ultimately a vessel. The true inheritance was the strength to make difficult choices, to value myself enough to set boundaries, to recognize when letting go was the bravest option. On the anniversary of selling the house, I invited my mother and brother to dinner at my townhouse, the first time they'd visited my new home. The conversation was sometimes awkward, old habits surfacing, but there was also laughter, genuine interest, and a tentative foundation for something healthier. As they prepared to leave, my mother paused in the doorway. "You know, I think your grandfather would be proud of you." "For selling his house?" I asked, surprised. "For having the courage to make hard choices." Maxwell never took the easy path either. Her words were the final piece of validation I hadn't realized I was seeking. Later that evening, I sat in my small garden, surrounded by blooming tulips, reflecting on the past year. I'd lost a house, but gained clarity. I'd enforced boundaries, but created space for genuine connection. I'd honored my grandfather's legacy not by clinging to a physical structure, but by embodying the principles he lived by. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear, but it was unburdened by toxic patterns and unmet expectations. Each day brought new opportunities to build relationships based on mutual respect, not obligation or guilt. Some days were harder than others, but even the difficult moments felt honest in a way my previous life hadn't. I often think about that moment of decision, standing in my damaged home, surrounded by the aftermath of disrespect, choosing to let go rather than continue the cycle. It wasn't an easy choice, but it was the right one for me. Sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is release what no longer serves us, even when it's wrapped in the comforting cloak of family tradition. If you're watching this and struggling with similar decisions, remember that boundaries aren't walls designed to keep others out. They're guidelines that teach others how to respectfully remain in your life. Your worth isn't determined by how much you're willing to tolerate, but by how much you're willing to respect yourself. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision for your own well-being that others didn't understand? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. And if this resonated with you, please subscribe and hit the like button so others can find this message too. Family is important, but so are you. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the courage to write your own, whatever that looks like for you.